ready?
So, dear IABL friends and colleagues, I'm Chrisa Lazo, the IABL Secretary General, and would wholeheartedly like to welcome all of you to the third panel discussion on blended learning, international perspectives, local voices. This month's focus is on European practices on blended learning with outstanding panelists from Greece, Sweden, Austria, Portugal, and Brussels. I would like to thank our panelists for accepting our invitation and share their expertise and research in the field, and we'll start by introducing them. So Dr. Avustos Tsinakos from Greece. Professor Tsinakos is the IETMA Lab Director, Professor at the Department of Computer Science in the International Hellenic University. He's also the Director of the Master Immersive Technologies in Education for Blended Learning Practices. Professor Tsinakos is one of the leading coordinators of the Professional Development Program on Blended Learning in Education in Greece, in close cooperation with the Ministry of Education, and one of the founding directors of our association. Then Dr. Ebba Åsa-Nilsson from Sweden. She is a professor at Victoria University of Wellington, member of the Executive Committee of the International Council for Open and Distance Education, the ICDE, and the chair of the Advocacy Committee. She has published a lot on blended learning, actually. And just to mention the ICDE report, Blended Learning, the State of the Nation, which we also host on our website. Professor Martin Ebner from Austria. Professor Ebner is currently the head of the Department of Educational Technology at Graz University in Austria. He holds an adjunct profession on media informatics and based on educational technology. And also his research focuses on seamless learning. So let's move now to Professor Antonio Teixeira from Portugal. He is the Associate Professor of Open, Distance and Networked Education, Department of Education and Distance Learning, Universidade Aberta. Am I right, Professor? And last but not least, Anastasia Sysigika, permanent representation of Greece to the European Union for Education, Culture and Sport in Brussels. Ms. Gika has also served as the Secretary General of the Ministry of Education in Greece. Thank you all for being here with us today. And so just to open the panel discussion and give the floor to our panelists, I would like to start with the first question. So it's highly known to all of us that blended learning has gained more adepts due to its cost effectiveness, flexibility, diversification, and access. Thus, what are the main gains, if any, that your institutions and your countries have experienced from this practice? So who would like to start with this? Professor Ebner? Shall I start from you?
Yeah, it's okay, of course, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much and a very warm welcome also from Austria. And from my perspective, so the most interesting things are the flexibility in time and place, of course, and the didactical advantages that we can learn self-paced as student. So we have found some time outside of the university, of course, where you can follow the lectures, content, and so on. And for the lectures, on the other side, it's of course a new way to think about how they must deal with that students are not only on place, but also online. And this is differs much to that what we have, of course, in the face-to-face education. And for the institution, from this perspective, it also might be attractive that we have to think how we use the campus again now. Also what should we do on the campus, and what can we do, for example, at home? That helps, of course, also our room problems. So we have always room problems. And but of course, we have new challenges in terms of infrastructure, of course, because if you have not a good infrastructure, it would not be running. And you need also very much support on that. So we have a very strong support for teachers as well as students to they get access to the content, that they have the environments, the platforms, or whatever.
Thank you so much, Professor Ebner. Professor Tsinakos, your insights?
Thank you. A great welcome also from Greece to everybody participating here. I think that one of the milestone achievement here in Greece, and I think in the rest of the world as well, is that it proved that educational should not be monolithic. That means that we can find always some new ways to adapt and, let's say, adjust to new challenges. And I think blended learning has gained a lot of ground under this perspective, because when we were talking about blended learning many years ago, there was this idea saying that nothing is compared to face-to-face education, and face-to-face education is the superior model of for educating people. Well, it proved that this is not the case, and for sure we can learn from different modalities of education, and that was the major, let's say, input and positive aspect of COVID period for the education.
Thank you, Professor Tsinakos. Professor Åsa Nilsson, please.
Yes, there are many benefits, of course, as we all know and what has been mentioned. First of all, I would like to stress, not at least due to the COVID-19, but maybe first of all, a warm welcome from Sweden as well to everyone. So thank you for being with us. So blended learning had the benefits because many aspects, because it's flexible, it allows socialization, it allows diversity, and the futures of education is online. There is no way going back, because this is the future and what we have to face. And also blended learning allows seamless learning to a high extent, and to merge formal and informal learning, and that learners can take the responsibilities of their own learning pathways. And that is maybe the most important, because it allows, it is about people, processes, and products. And maybe products is they are equal of value, but it is people is the most important, and also the processes. And we have to take that into account in the futures of education. And the futures of education is blended. It is more and more mainstream in most of the countries.
Thank you so much, Professor Åsa Nilsson. Ms. Gika, could you please unmute? Thank you.
Hello from Brussels. I wouldn't agree more. Blended learning has really been the benefit that COVID-19 has left us with. Because before it was one of the teaching and learning modes, but it was not something that had been tested and had been really tried throughout the teaching and learning community. And COVID-19 made us use digital learning, online teaching, blended learning, because otherwise we couldn't offer, as teachers, educators, and our youngsters, our pupils, we wouldn't be able to offer education. Some countries managed to adjust and managed to create the setup so that online learning, blended learning, would reach even the most remote areas in our countries. And some others have faced a lot of difficulties. I think the discussion we're having today is to help and give ideas and practical ways to adopt blended learning, because we have learned that is the best way when you combine face-to-face teaching and online teaching that will help students with special difficulties, students who are in, as I said earlier, remote areas, or when we have, for example, in Greece, severe weather conditions, or when we have we have people with disabilities, or people who work during the day. Online learning or online assessment or all the rest can help us really promote learning at any circumstances, and that's a big gain. Thank you.
So sorry, so sorry. Thank you so much, Ms. Gika. Professor Teixeira.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're actually following us. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Krista, for the kind invitation. I would like also to say hi to everyone, and especially the colleagues in the panel. Well, regarding this issue, I would first to have some kind of discussion amongst us as well. To say that I believe that the experience of the pandemic has also enriched the concept of blended learning. So when we traditionally talked about blended learning, was very much about combining, as it was said, face-to-face part of the learning process with online learning part of the process, but in a sequence. Today, with the experience that we had, all the different experience that we had, we're coming to see it more like a kind of a hybrid experience, in the sense that simultaneously we can have components that are partly online, partly face-to-face, and this adds a new degree of complexity to the process, but also enriches the process as well.
Thank you so much.
If you allow me just to add a little bit more to the answer, I would say that in summing up, as it is a combination of these two different elements, it increases the quality and the sustainability of the learning experience, because it adds time to reflect and to consolidate the learning achievement by the student. And so it increases the quality, apart from, of course, the flexibility, the personalization, customization, the opening up of the assessment and the certification that it can add as well. And also an important element that was pointed out by CC, the internationalization element. Not just the internationalization of the cohort, but also the collaboration between institutions.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your wonderful insights. I really think that you give much information to our audience. So moving on to the second question. So considering that educational institutions are gradually returning to face-to-face instruction, campus instruction, what are the main challenges that educational systems have to confront with? So Professor Tsinakos, would you like to start with this question, please?
Yes, thank you. I think there are two main issues for universities and educational institutions that they have to deal with. One is flexibility, and the other one is the inclusiveness. I mean, students have realized that using this emergency remote teaching or distance education that comes to be adapted later on in the COVID era suits their learning needs better than the traditional system or the traditional process followed, especially at the university level. And we realized that in some cases, students feel more comfortable to participate in courses that didn't have the opportunity to join due to many reasons. Lack of resources to travel, and or lack of the ability to move in case of if they are facing with disabilities. So they realized that they saved a lot of energy, time, money when they adopted when they were adopted in a scenario like this. And in case of pure blended learning scenarios, they realized that they could enhance their learning abilities because they were mixing skills faced with that they have developed through face-to-face processes with digital skills. So this made the whole course and the whole educational process much more interesting for them. I think now that we are back in the class, we have to compete with these challenges. And it is similar to the challenge that teachers have to deal with the young students attending the first grade at the very first classroom, when they are used to play video games and YouTube and all these interactive games, and suddenly they are sitting in front of a desk and they're supposed to listen for 6 hours a teacher. So this is a really unpleasant surprise for them. So I think our students have experienced the same thing again at an older age. And those are the two key areas that we should learn from what has happened. And I think blended learning gives us this opportunity to do it.
Thank you so much. Ms. Gika?
What we do now? What we do now? We carry on combining, as Dr. Tsinakos said, and what the European Skills and Agenda says, that was published in 2020, defines actions to help individuals and businesses develop more and better skills, and to put them to use this by strengthening sustainable competitiveness and by building resilience to react to crisis. So what we have learned is to try to combine. So we are ready for the next crisis to use only online if it is necessary. To be able to do so, we have to be prepared in every possible way and be able to combine. So we need to combine, because we found out that this is a way to offer opportunities for developing competencies in digital technology and all the rest. So I think this is the most important, to combine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Ebner?
Yeah, I would like to add something, and for me the most challenging part will be why should the students come back? So why should they come back to the campus? What is the attractive? How can I do it so attractive, my own teaching, that there is a really advantage to come back? And do we have to think that the campus itself has a new role? So I must come back because maybe there is a good interaction, or there are laboratories, or I can do some handy things or something like that. But of course, if I'm just teaching, then my online would be better. And the students will do that. They will completely give us these feelings that they need something more than just what we can do via online teaching. And the second thing is, when they are coming back, then the next thing is, and we are doing much on blended learning, and they have different kind of lectures. That would also not be easy, because that means we have a constant switch between off and online. That means maybe I have the first 2 hours in the off and on the campus, and then I have to switch online because there is another lecture. And currently we are not prepared for that, because we have not places where you can just learn online as a student. And that's also a big challenge. And the most easier part would be complete off and complete online teaching. Yeah? But of course, this the most challenging for the next future, of course. Yeah? That's what I see.
Thank you so much. Professor Teixeira?
Well, from my point of view, well, let me just share with you. My university works fully online since 2007. So we have, for us, the change is not dramatic. Anyway, regarding the country as a whole, there is a move to blended learning across the higher education sector, and especially the public universities. I would say, in reply to your question, that the biggest challenge is digital transformation. So it's a broader process. It's not just adding technology in this sense, a digital dimension, learning design and to the learning experience as such. But the entire institutions have to redesign, have to re-engineer their processes in order to explore the potential, the possibilities of digital technology and special intelligent digital technologies with use of artificial intelligence, learning analytics, all of these, that now is changing dramatically the way that we can imagine the learning experience. But that also implies opening up practices, opening up the learning, teaching and learning practices, opening up assessment processes, and changing certification, the way that we certify the learning achievements. So I would say that these are the main challenges, and of course it implies reorganization of the universities, retraining in a sense, and professional development of the staff, both teacher staff and administrative staff and technical staff as well. So, and of course, the changing, as Martin was stating as well, adapting infrastructure and internal procedures, of course.
Thank you so much, Professor. Professor Nilsson, please.
Yes, thank you. The real challenge, in my perspective, is that we have to rethink the role of education, and not at least due to COVID, because everything has changed. And we have seen the missing points, we have seen the vulnerabilities, which have been maybe there for a long time, but we have taken them more or less for granted. But now when we really saw the gaps, we have to face it. So the real challenge is to implement the core pillars of the Sustainability Development Goals about access, inclusiveness, democracy, quality, lifelong learning, and not at least about equity, because that is really, really important. And blended learning maybe can be catalyzed for that. So it's not a goal as such. And I think that is really important to stress, because it is a way to achieve those more meta goals, education for all, and to embrace the social learning, the social aspects of learning, and to embrace diversity, and really to embrace the needs and demands from the people. And as UNESCO is saying also about the futures of education, which I'm very much fond of. And as you may know, they have launched recently the new social contract. There is a need for a new social contract for education. And this was discussed actually already before the COVID. And as someone was saying as well, as you were saying, for example, Sissi, that there will be other kind of crises. There will be war, there is already war. And the education system is really facing vulnerabilities about that. And there will be other kind of crises, and we need to be resilient in our system. So the big challenge is a need of not a systematic, but a system change in the educational system. And for that is leadership, management, capacity building, of course, infrastructure, other kind of pedagogical approaches, other kind of modes of learning, where blended learning is one of them. So we need to also face the culture of learning for this new social contract. And that is a real challenge, because it means that we have to maybe change our aspirations, maybe change our the way we think, the way we act, and the way we work.
So, Professor Nilsson, in such a perspective, and in the light of the transformational nature of blended learning, what do you think are the areas that the teachers and researchers should work on to make the best of blended learning affordances?
One thing is, which is already done, is about to learn from the students, from the learners, and to work together with them, because they have the demands and they have the goals. So to see learners as more as a collaborators, that is a really good point to start with, at least. And then I think it's also important to work at all levels. I mean, the meta level, the macro level, the meso level, and the nano level, of course. So everyone has a responsibility, not just the teachers, but also the leaders, and the whole academic, all the academic staffs have a responsibility. So I think capacity building at all levels is really, really important, because with that you can make this cultural change. It can't just be made of teachers, and that is too much demanding for teachers. And I think maybe we have done that for too long time. We need to, broaden it up, so everyone have an ownership of this new approach.
So true. Ms. Gika, your insights?
It is absolutely correct that the ownership of this approach, of course, has to do with each one of the educators. But I think it has developed through the practitioners, and I would think that the practitioners on primary and secondary education have really put a much more effort than tertiary, because in higher education, blended learning was not unknown, had been a practice. It was not something like a ghost. But in primary, secondary education, it was quite unknown, and they have made a lot of effort. And this is something that I think that helps them a lot. It makes their role much easier, facilitates their work. I'll give you some examples. First of all, they can make their teaching so personalized, because when we teach a whole class in face-to-face in mode, there are some pupils that are left behind, and you can approach them through online learning, through digital special tailored classes and things like that. Also, the assessment, the whole assessment procedure. As a practitioner myself for years, the hardest time of the school year was when I had exam papers, something like 200 tests, lots of pages, 3, 4, 5 pages, which I had to sit down and correct line by line. This can be done digitally. This is a part of blended learning. And if this is done digitally, just imagine how many more things teachers in class, for primary and secondary especially, will be able to have the time to do. So I think that this change, we have to realize that we have put the effort, and now we can see the benefits. And all teachers at all levels should see it as something very beneficial for themselves, for their own personal development, and for their students and pupils as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Professor Xenakos?
Well, I have two additions to what have been discussed so far. One of the things that teachers and researchers should learn as a result of all this, let's say, process is the ability, or let's say the necessity, to adopt universal design learning in their courses. Because everyone realized that they didn't have good lessons in that quality that can be transferred from face-to-face to online courses. So you need to have a special, let's say, to be trained on how to do this shift from face-to-face to online or even blended learning. So just keep one parameter, which is the universal design learning that we should adopt regardless the modality that we are following. The second key area I think that it's worth to look at and let's say keep up doing is to become more inventive as instructors, as teachers, and why not as students. But I will focus on teachers more by saying that we have to be more creative when we are scheduling lessons plans, because right now most of the lesson plans that we are using, I think that are getting outdated very rapidly, because students have new skills, and this process of emergency remote teaching show us that students have a totally different, let's say, aspects and expectations from education that were thinking that was happening during face-to-face teaching. So UDL and our ability to become more creative should be two key points that we should keep up doing, regardless the mode of education that we are teaching.
May I add something on that discussion?
Of course.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, universal design is so important, but I think it and to be innovative, etc. What you have been said, but I think it's really also important to stress the assessments and the examinations, because as long as those are like they are right now and have been the last 100 years or so, nothing will actually change. So changing also the way we also know that the labor market, for example, are actually asking for, of course, it's good to be an engineer or a nurse or whatever, but they're also asking for a lot of other kind of competencies, like what we call the 21st century competencies. So that also need to be integrated in the curricula, but also into the examinations and assessment, and also the way, I mean, assessment is for learning, of learning, or as learning. There are different kind of aspects of that. And I used to, as some of you know, I work a lot with quality issues, and I used to say, as long as we have, I mean, this kind of quality assurance agencies, dimensions or criteria or KPIs, as they are right now, nothing will really change. But when we change also the KPIs, everything will also change automatically, not automatically, but more easily. And in the end of that chain is about the assessment and the students.
So much, Professor Nilsson. So any more insights on this issue? Who would like to add to the discussion? Thank you.
Well, I can add something. Actually, I believe that we in the discussion we should separate a little bit what has been the theoretical developments and even the best practices regarding blended learning, independently from the COVID-19 experience, and what we've learned with the COVID-19 experience. But because we cannot take away that experience, of course, now it has become central to our own environment. It's important to take notice, as the colleagues have done, of what has been seen in all of this context. And so it became paramount, this need to focus on the training of teachers, and not just in the sense of letting them have a clear understanding of what are the best pedagogical approaches, the best pedagogical methodologies that should be applied. We've seen real disasters, for instance, in terms of e-assessment across Europe, and not just Europe, and that of course creates a need to tackle that issue. Of course, issues related to access to digital accessibility and all of these are also paramount at this stage. But I would say that apart from this, it's also become clear to us that, and the experience of the pandemic has accelerated that process, as I said before, of digital transformation, but also of generating a digital citizenship. And in that sense, this digital culture has also specific values that should be embraced. And of course, an increase of participation. So in the learning process, of course, the participation of students and learners in the management of their own learning process. Of course, things as co-assessment, co-learning design, and all of these now are becoming important and have to be tackled and not just in terms of teacher training, but also embedded in the learning cultures of the institutions. It's also important to take notice that we have seen in this context that although, for instance, at the higher education level, we have very good pedagogical models that can be applied to learning, but non-university, pre-university levels, 12 and even more basic levels. There were not so many, as Cici has said, there were not so many good best practices that could be applied. So there is a need for research to research on that level. So how to apply blended learning methodology with students that, or for students that have not major autonomy in their learning process. But also it's important to add that we need to develop pedagogical models that foster critical thinking and can improve, in that sense, can be used for deeper learning in this sense. This is critical for the sustainability of this. I would add, if I may, just shortly, there are also some threats in a sense, or I would say challenges, probably better, which is the increased use of automation. And in that sense, we should be able to research and to include in practice and a lot of concerns regarding the ethical use of technology.
So true. So true. Thank you so much.
The limits that it implies.
Thank you so much. Any more insights for this question? I think we have all.
Yeah, maybe
Professor Obner, yes.
Yeah,
thank you.
let me add the last thing, as I guess we did not talk about the environments, about the technical issues, yeah, because it's very important. You know, technical issues means the technique in between the students and the lecturer is another barrier. Yeah, that means face-to-face is easier because I need no technological issues, and of course, if we are going online, there is an additional barrier between them. And we have to think about how this can work, because students might, well, the same way the teachers have not the last software, they have not the best smartphone or whatever they need, for example. And we see a lot of problems there, yeah, because they have not the money to buy that, for example. They did not care about good webcams and whatever. And from a perspective of the university as well as the country, we have to think about how we can assist students in these terms, of course. And then the second thing is, of course, we need the capacity on the side of the learning environment, of course. Yeah? It means we have tons of servers, we have much more traffic, of course, because more and more learners are expecting that the software is running and it's smoothly. And then we have to think about not only the technical side in the sense of servers and hardware, but also how must the software look like, for example, learning experience design, usability, and something like that. And it's a big issues that we make these environments much more interactive, much more communicative, and something like that. And I think there is many work to do there.
Thank you so much, Professor Ebner. So if I can move to the next question to give you all the opportunity to share. So where do you think should the focus be for educational policymakers and stakeholders when working with blended learning? I think Ms. Gika should be the first here.
I mean, I think we actually said a few things about that, because policymakers, through research and through obvious the outcomes, I mean, the positive outcomes we have seen, realize how important it is to embed blended learning throughout the teaching system, from nursery to higher education. And And what it is being done, and what is the European Union is trying to do through council recommendations and many other documents, is to support the idea of incorporating at all phases blended learning. Education is fundamental, okay, we know that, and access to it, the most efficient access to it is through blended learning. This is what is written throughout all the papers that ministers are signing. So all competencies we gain through blended learning can give our young generation, ourselves and the younger generations, many skills they need to continue. And also the fact that inclusiveness is a very big issue when we talk about blended learning. This is another thing that makes it a must that policymakers cannot ignore. So we go ahead redesigning, as lots of our colleagues mentioned, redesigning the education system and taking into account the need and also the outcomes of blended learning approaches, blended teaching. And because we talk about learning, but to have blended learning, you have to have blended teaching, of course, blended teaching, as we said, in all the levels of the educational systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Teixeira?
Well, I would say that the first thing is to be clear for policymakers and stakeholders that a blended learning experience is a quality one and could be a very rich one. And this is something that I would say that still, unfortunately, across Europe, it is not still a given. Many policymakers still doubt that this is the case. But that has to be overcome. But regarding policymakers and stakeholders, in general, I would say that it's important for the conditions for successful and quality blended learning to be created. And this implies adapting regulations. This implies giving the award the needed infrastructures, funding, teacher training. I'll give you an example. Most of the teacher training that has been conducted in the past 20 years has been in face-to-face environments. This is completely wrong, and so that is why many of the teachers during the pandemic, although have received some training, were unable to adjust to this new environment because they never experienced before. So before being a good blended learning teacher, you have to be a good, you have to experience blended learning as a learner as well, as a student or as a trainee or whatever. So it is important to change that mentality and that perspective. Of course, there are a lot of things that are already done, and I think that the European Commission has done a lot regarding these, especially in the last year. The new agenda is a very important step forward, fostering digital learning, and this is helping, and this will be quite important for the national governments as well. But it's important, as I said before, also to add these new issues that are on the horizon, the ethical issues that are involved, the use, how can, or how should, and what are the limits and the benefits of introducing technology in our teaching and learning process.
Thank you so much.
If I could add something, may I? I'm sorry
of
for
course.
interrupting. All right. Now,
You're
in
welcome.
the latest Council recommendation of blended learning approaches for high quality and inclusive primary and secondary education, because as we said, and I'm sure that we all agree that blended learning was not something unusual. In higher education, primary and secondary education levels have got the issue was as something, it was unknown. So I'm going to read the Article 16, which from this document, from the Council recommendations, these recommendations were published on the 29th of November 2021. So it's the most recent document. So blended learning can enhance broad competence development due to the variety of learning tasks and tools they can encompass. The use of digital technology, including connecting devices online, can facilitate the interaction of the learner with other learners, learning programs, and other source information, and can support face-to-face learning and learning in different environments. Acquisition of digital and data competencies can be facilitated by blended learning. The complementary use of scientific equipment, open education resources, craft tools, realia, and published text and writing and visual arts tools can support creativity, can enhance imagination and personal expression. So both as on individual and a collaborative modes. So there is full support. There is full support for primary and secondary education. And this is where actually, because this is the earlier level of childhood, is where we have to work so that the next generation will be fully blended, equipped and using blended learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gita.
May I just add something? As not as a comment, but as a complementary comment in that sense to what CCS just told us. This is important, and there are documents being produced by the European Commission for 20 years that are really positive in this sense. Well, I've collaborated in several of them, and I'm still a little bit frustrated that in the end, the result was not exactly what we have imagined it would be. Because there are things that are important to stress. One of them is students are technologically savvy, but they don't know how to learn online. They have to learn to learn. They have to learn to learn in these new environments, because these environments is not just adding technology to a traditional environment, is something a little bit different. And in that sense, this has to be reinforced. And in the same way, of course, with teachers. But it's what I would just stress is that these directives should be clearly understood at national level, regional level, when they are actually implemented by schools, by universities, by, well, education institutions in general. And that is a strategic change that has to occur in these institutions level across Europe.
Thank you so much. So any more insights on this question before moving on to the last one?
I haven't had a say on this question.
Thank you.
But I don't
Go on, please.
I don't know
Please.
exactly what the question is, but I think that you started to talk about the policymakers and stakeholders.
Yes, exactly.
I think we have been going around a bit, but I think it is really, really important to really stress the importance of the ecosystem when we talk about blended learning, and that encompasses all the levels, from the meta level, so for example, this report you referred to, CC, and others, and also what UNESCO is doing, and OECD, etc., to really make this understandable and implemented at all levels within an institution, within an organization, because everyone need to take the ownership, because if you don't have the ownership of it, then you can't really implement it with trust and confidence. So that is one thing. And actually in the report, which you referred to, Krista, in the beginning, and I wrote in the chat the link for that, already at that time, some years ago, when I wrote the global study about the blended learning, I also forwarded some recommendations or messages, which actually are the same as we have been discussing so far. So we need to go from discussing and talking to actions. That is really, really important. And that again means that everyone needs to take actions. We can't just sit and wait for policies or others to implement the thing. We need to take the stance ourselves and to do something. that because one of the recommendation is actually one of the first one in this report is that to base success on people, the human dimension. And also that education has, not at least due to COVID situation, I mean, exams and turn subject or whatever curricula is important, but the socio-emotional aspects of education is also so important, and blended learning is a perfect method to embrace that. So that again goes, I mean, it is a catalyst for achieving this, and also to really to ensure that to cultivate, as also was in one of those recommendations in the report, about cultivate a culture of quality and ecology for blended learning.
So true.
And also another thing, quite often, I think you mentioned that as well, Antonio, about research. I mean, quite often research on blended learning is about to compare blended learning with campus. We have to stop to do that, because we need to do research on blended learning, and also I mean, blended learning as such, and this kind of methods. Because again, there is of course a lot of research on this, but it's more or less, you always compare blended with campus or face-to-face or hybrid or whatever. They are different. And also, I think it was mentioned that we can't really compare the situation from the COVID time and what's happened there with the blended learning and with online learning, or what we really mean. I mean, all of us in this forum, both the panelists and the audience, I mean, it is different with this remote teaching education, online education, than quality-based planned blended learning or online learning.
So true. Thank you so much. Professor Tsinakos, you would like to add something, I think?
Yes, if I may. I have two things to point out here. One, and both of them have to do with policymakers. One is that they have to realize that access to knowledge and infrastructure, like internet connectivity, should be similar to the right of everyone to access all the public goods, because we realized that in many cases, students and teachers were lacking of such infrastructures, internet connectivities, the appropriate devices to do their courses, or to, let's say, stay in contact with the educational session. So this is something that policymakers should keep in their mind, that those components, meaning especially internet connectivity, is a fundamental, let's say, element that everybody should be able to reach out and use for educational purposes. The other point that I would like to stress out, again for the policymakers, is to act like the sport managers. For example, if I'm coaching a basketball team, I have my own plan how to win the game. Okay, so that's the approach that the policymakers should have. But they also have to trust their players, their own talents. And here, our players are the educators. We have to let them be creative and inventive, not to, let's say, try to stress them and pack them in an industrial prototype, let's say a can, that everybody should do this, this, and this step, or they should use this and this and this, let's say, process. Of course, we can draw some lines, put some quality, let's say, standards, but we should trust their talents as well. So please act as coaches, not as directors.
Thank you so much. I think we have a turn on this, all of us, on this question. So let's close this discussion by some key elements that you would like to leave our audience as takeaways from this discussion. So what would you like to share with the audience in order to embrace blended learning as educators or stakeholders in a more natural and purposeful manner. So would you like, Professor Teixeira, would you like to be the first one now?
Sorry, Chris, I missed the last part of your, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course, of course. About the conclusive key elements for our audience as takeaways to implement, to embrace blended learning in a more natural, more purposeful manner in their teaching practices.
Well, I would say that this should be based on a good pedagogical approach, and this I would, in this sense, I would emphasize the importance of increasing or improving, I would say, improving the knowledge transfer from research to actual practice, because this element is still being a little bit missed. And so it is important to base your practices on evidence-based research, and of course this is clearly important. Also to conduct a reflexive kind of practice, so to be quite reflective on what you're doing, how you're organizing, what are you achieving with the methodology that you're using, and also being quite conscious that you're dealing with a different kind of environment from a traditional one. So this blended approach that generates a kind of a hybrid learning environment and could be extended in many ways with the use of the new digital technologies, generates a new sort of learning, some new features to the learning process, and that has to be clearly taken into consideration. Of course, it's important for teachers to develop their digital competencies. This is clearly important, and the European framework for digital educators is a very good reference on what is important for teachers to have as a profile. Also, be quite aware that the students, your learners, need to learn how to actually interact in such an environment, because they're most technological savvy, but they are not experienced to learn using these devices in this ecosystem, as Eva was pointing out. And of course, having also in mind that the most important thing here is to improve the quality of the learning experience. Independently of the technology that you're using, the methodology that you're using, the focus is to improve the quality of the learning outcome in that sense. And I think this is important. Also, take into consideration that you can use different kinds of technologies depending on what you have available. So you can use simpler technology or more complex one, and the result could be, the outcome could be as good in one or the other. It depends on not only on the conditions and the context, but basically on the quality of the learning design that you apply.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Professor Ebner, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the final sentence for me, it's rather easy. It's always the same. It's learning by doing. So this is all for all stakeholders, for students, for teachers, for, I don't know, for any stakeholder for the institution. We have to learn as how we can deal the best, more or less, with this blended learning. And we have to see it as a chance for the future of education, because the only thing I'm very sure it's not stoppable. So we cannot stop anymore, because education online becomes a must, and we have to think about how we can improve, of course, the situation and how we can improve the quality, whatever, but we cannot stop it anymore.
Thank you so much. Professor Nilsson, please. Your last words.
Yes, some of my last words is about that change is made by people and for people. So we really need to embrace, and as I said before, also that success is based on people and the human aspect. And it is about you and me, and we can make a change together. And for that, we, of course, need to think about what I spoke about before, about the need for this new social contract to repeat injustice while transforming the educational system. And I think what is written in this UNESCO report, for example, which I referred to, is about both we need to look for between past promises to an uncertain future, because the only thing we know about the future is that it is uncertain. And for that, we need to renew the education system. And we have discussed that during this hour today. And it is about leadership. It is about the curricula, changes in the curricula. It's about the transformative work by teachers. It is about education across different times and spaces, and to embrace diversity. And most of all,
I think Ms. Gika.
I would like to refer to what Emma said earlier. We're wasting our time if we carry on comparing face-to-face teaching and learning to digital learning. Face-to-face, the exclusivity of face-to-face learning is out of date, has gone, is not there. The present and the future of teaching is based on blended learning. If we really want to cultivate a democratic ethos and inclusiveness, we certainly have to use blended learning, because this is the only teaching that can take place without excluding somebody, without giving more opportunities, giving equal opportunities. And this is what we want. We want to offer opportunities, better opportunities, more competencies, be fair and be open and democratic. And blended learning has to do with openness, as it gives, as we said, it gives more to more people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And your conclusive comments, Professor Tsinakos?
Well, I have two. One is for the educators to be patient, and the way they've been patient in this session, listening to us during this all this time. And the second one is that everyone should be, let's say, should be open, flexible, and adaptive when you are dealing with education. In the same way that everyone should be open, flexible, and adaptive when we are seeking happiness in our life. So I think that's the concluding point, because education, for me, and I hope for you, is part of the great happiness in our life. So that's my concluding point here.
Thank you all so much for your insightful contributions today. It was my great pleasure. And of course, I have to thank the board, the IABL board, for being here with us today. So Georgios Korbas, the acting president, if you would like to share a word with us, George. Connie Drabala, AK Apostolos Kotropoulos, who is in distant USA, but still with us. We have Shadia here with us today as a board member, and Liliana. Thank you all. And Tony, have I mentioned you? I hope I have. Thank you all for being here with us today. Yorgos, would you like to have a comment?
Yeah, thanks
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Thank you for joining. I would like to thank our panelists and most of all our fabulous secretary and moderator of the panel for the Voices from Europe. I just wanted to say that I would like to invite all of you to join the International Association for Blended Learning. IABL.org is our website, and please become members. And we have more of those panels coming from the North America, Middle East, and then Australia and the Far East. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Krista, for all your work, and thank you to your panelists.
Thank you, George, for your support. So I would like to thank the panelists, first of all, and all the wonderful participants that have shared So many comments here. So unless there is a last question from somebody from the audience that would like to ask to the panelists. Thank you all. So I see no questions at the end of the discussion. So thank you all for this great panel discussion today from all around Europe, South, North, East Europe. Thank you so much.